We configured the most advanced AI models to create two characters, one defending the state of Israel, its strikes on Iran, its security doctrine, and its right to prevent a nuclear-armed enemy that has openly called for its destruction. The other, defending the Islamic Republic of Iran, its sovereignty, its nuclear program, and its resistance to what it calls American and Israeli imperialism. The debate begins with this question. Both Israel and Iran claim this war was forced upon them. Israel calls the strikes on February 28th defensive. Iran calls them aggression during active negotiations. How do you reconcile two nations that both believe their survival depends on the other's defeat?
Listen carefully to what you just said. You speak of survival while your air force was bombing a nation that had not struck you. You speak of self-defense while your warplanes killed more than 3,400 Iranians in their own homes, including 376 children and 496 women. You attacked us during active negotiations. The Omani foreign minister had announced just days before the strikes that significant progress had been made, that Iran had agreed it would never possess nuclear material capable of producing a bomb. Then your bombs fell on our schools, our hospitals, our gas fields, our refineries. You killed our supreme leader in his own home. You assassinated our defense minister and the commander of our army in a single morning, and now you call this self-defense. The truth is simpler. Israel did not want a nuclear deal. Israel wanted regime change. You did not strike to prevent a weapon. You struck because a weakened Iran was an opportunity. You waited until our economy had collapsed under 20 years of your sanctions, until protests shook our streets, until Hezbollah was bleeding and Assad had fallen. Then you attacked. This is not self-defense. This is the oldest pattern in colonial history. Strike the enemy when he is wounded and call it justice. Let me ask you honestly. If Iran had bombed Tel Aviv during an active negotiation and killed your prime minister in his bedroom, would the world be debating whether it was preemptive defense, or would it be calling it what it is, naked aggression?
For decades we waited. We watched Iran build a nuclear program designed for one purpose: to make our destruction physically possible. Their supreme leader called us a cancerous tumor that must be removed. Their parliament chants death to Israel as a slogan of state. They funded, armed, and trained the men who slaughtered 1,200 Israelis on October 7th. They built a ring of fire around us. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq and Syria. And from each of those fronts, rockets and missiles flew at Israeli civilians for 2 straight years. We tried diplomacy. The world tried diplomacy. The 2015 nuclear deal collapsed because Iran kept enriching uranium and lying to inspectors. By February 2026, Iran had stockpiled more than 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, enough fissile material for several nuclear bombs. The IAEA reported they had moved that uranium to underground sites the 2025 strikes had not destroyed. Negotiations failed because Iran was using them as cover. So when we acted on February 28th, we did not act in aggression. We acted in survival. A country of 9 million people, surrounded by enemies who openly want its extinction, does not have the luxury of waiting for the missile to be loaded. We struck the nuclear program, the missile factories, and the leadership that designed our deaths. If you call this aggression, then you have decided that our survival is negotiable. We have decided it is not.
The hostility between Israel and Iran did not always exist. Until 1979, the two countries had close ties. How did we arrive at a moment where one nation believes the other must not exist?
You leave out the part that makes the story make sense. In 1953, the United States and Britain overthrew our democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh because he wanted to nationalize Iranian oil. They installed the Shah, a king who tortured Iranians for 25 years with American training and Israeli help. Israel was not our friend before 1979. Israel was a partner of a dictator who was murdering our people in the name of Western interests. The 1979 revolution was a revolution against that, against foreign domination of our country. And what did the world do when our revolution succeeded? Saddam Hussein invaded us in 1980 with American backing. The United States gave him chemical weapons that he used on Iranian cities. 500,000 Iranians died in that war, while the West watched and applauded. That is the foundation of the Islamic Republic. That is why we built proxies, because we learned that no power on earth would defend Iranian lives if they were inconvenient to American oil and Israeli expansion. You speak of our hatred as if it appeared from nowhere, as if it were metaphysical. It was born from a coup, a dictator, a chemical war, and 40 years of sanctions designed to starve our children. You confuse our defense for aggression because you have never once acknowledged what was done to make us this way. We did not invent death to America as theology. We chanted it because America had already practiced death on us, and we had no other voice.
Yes, under the Shah, Israel and Iran were partners. We exchanged intelligence. We traded oil and technology. We had common interests. The break came in 1979, and it did not happen because Israel changed. It happened because the Iranian regime changed. The men who took power that year, Khomeini then Khamenei, built their entire legitimacy on the destruction of Israel. They called us the Little Satan. They invented Quds Day to celebrate the day Jerusalem would fall to them. They wrote into their constitution that the export of their revolution was a state mission, and they meant it. From 1982 they built Hezbollah in Lebanon. From the 1990s they funded Hamas. From the 2000s they trained Iraqi militias. From the 2010s they armed the Houthis in Yemen. They turned their ideology into infrastructure. Billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of fighters, tens of thousands of missiles, all aimed at our cities. We did not start this. They did. They built a 40-year project to encircle and destroy us, and now they ask why we have lost patience. We lost patience because every year they came closer to succeeding, and do not pretend the hostility is symmetrical. We never said Iran had no right to exist. They have said that about us. In writing, in speeches, in chants, in fatwas, every year since 1979. The asymmetry is not in our actions. It is in their ideology.
The nuclear program sits at the center of this war. Israel says it is an existential threat. Iran says it is a sovereign right. Was Iran's nuclear program the real cause of this war, or the excuse for it?
You speak of nuclear weapons with a moral seriousness you have never applied to yourself. Israel possesses an estimated 90 nuclear warheads. Israel has never signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Israel has never permitted a single IAEA inspection of Dimona. Israel demands the right to nuclear weapons for itself, while insisting no one else in the region may even enrich uranium for civilian use. This is not a security argument. This is a hierarchy. You decide who is permitted to defend themselves and who is not. And let me correct you on something specific. The IAEA never confirmed Iran was building a weapon. Director Rafael Grossi himself stated, in his own words, that the agency had no proof of a systematic effort to move toward a nuclear weapon. Khamenei issued a religious edict in 2003, banning the production and use of nuclear arms. We were enriching to 60%, because you had withdrawn from the deal in 2018, sanctioned us into ruin, and assassinated our scientists. The enrichment was leverage in a negotiation we were already willing to settle. You did not strike because Iran was about to build a bomb. You struck because Iran might one day be able to build one, and a country with the option to defend itself is a country you cannot dictate to. The real question is not whether Iran can be trusted with nuclear technology. The real question is why Israel and the United States believe only their bombs are safe.
It is the cause, and anyone who tells you otherwise is helping Iran buy time. Look at the trajectory. In 2003, the IAEA caught Iran with a covert enrichment facility at Natanz they had hidden for 18 years. In 2009, they revealed Fordo, a facility built into a mountain to survive bombing. In 2015, the world signed the JCPOA precisely because Iran's program had no civilian explanation. Iran had no commercial nuclear power needs that required 60% enrichment. Civilian reactors run on 3 to 5%. Medical isotopes need 20%. 60% enrichment has only one purpose, and that is the threshold to weapons grade. By June 2025, the IAEA confirmed Iran had over 400 kilograms of 60% uranium. That is enough material for 9 to 10 bombs. They had ballistic missiles capable of reaching every Israeli city. They had a regime whose supreme leader had spent 40 years promising our annihilation. Tell me, what country in the world would tolerate this? The United States destroyed Iraq for far less. India and Pakistan went to the brink of war over far less. We are a country smaller than New Jersey. One nuclear weapon ends us. There is no second strike for Israel. There is no margin for error. So yes, the program was the cause. Not because we feared their economy. Not because we feared their politics. Because we are the one country on earth that cannot survive a single nuclear miscalculation.
Set aside the nuclear question for a moment. The strikes on February 28th happened while diplomatic talks were active. Iran says this was a betrayal of negotiations. Israel says the talks were theater. Which is true?
You have just admitted what Iran has said from the beginning. You attacked while talks were ongoing, and you justify it by saying you decided in advance the talks would fail. That is not diplomacy. That is the appearance of diplomacy as cover for a strike already planned. The Omani foreign minister was not a regime spokesman. He was a respected international mediator who said publicly that Iran had agreed to terms it had never agreed to before, that Iran would never possess nuclear material capable of producing a weapon. That is the concession the world had demanded for 20 years. We made it, and then your bombs fell. You speak of patterns. Let me show you a pattern. The United States withdrew from the 2015 deal in 2018 when Iran was in full compliance, verified by the IAEA every quarter. We were following the agreement. You broke it. Then you sanctioned us, demanded a new deal, and when we came to the table, you bombed us. This is not the behavior of a country seeking peace. This is the behavior of a country that has decided in advance that the answer is force, and uses negotiations only to choose the moment of attack. If your principle is that you may strike during talks because you do not trust the other side, then no negotiation in the future means anything. You have not just bombed Iran, you have bombed the idea of diplomacy itself. And every regime in the world is now watching, learning the lesson. Talk to the West, and they kill you while you are speaking.
Both are true, and that is the answer you do not want to hear. The talks were active. They were also theater. Iran has used negotiations the same way for 30 years, to slow the world while the centrifuges keep spinning. Look at the pattern. From 2003 to 2015, 12 years of talks, while Iran tripled its enriched uranium. From 2018 to 2025, 7 more years of talks, while Iran moved enrichment from 5% to 60%. The Omani mediators said progress was being made. That has been said about every round of Iran talks for 2 decades. Meanwhile, the IAEA confirmed Iran had moved highly enriched uranium to undeclared underground sites after the 2025 strikes. Meanwhile, Iranian officials publicly stated that normal safeguards were no longer applicable. Meanwhile, the protest of January 2026 had been crushed with thousands of civilian deaths, and the regime was in its weakest position in 40 years. We did not betray a negotiation. We refused to be the next country fooled by it. President Trump said he was not thrilled with the talks, because the talks were the same script Iran had used to evade pressure since 2003. Diplomacy requires 2 sides willing to settle. Iran was willing to talk forever and decide nothing. We could not afford forever. Forever is what Iran wanted, because forever is the time it takes to build a bomb.
Iran's regional network, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, militias in Iraq and Syria, has been called the axis of resistance by Tehran and a terror network by Israel. October 7th was the deadliest attack on Jews since the Holocaust. How do you defend the moral structure of the regional war that began that day?
I will not defend October 7th. The killing of civilians is a crime regardless of the flag of the killer. But I will refuse the story you have just told. because it is missing every element that makes it true. Hamas did not emerge from nowhere on October 7th. It emerged from 56 years of occupation, from a 17-year siege of Gaza, from a population of 2 million people, half of whom are children, locked in a strip of land smaller than New York City, where Israel controls the air, the water, the food, and the borders. Iran did not create the conditions that produced October 7th, Israel created them. Iran simply armed the resistance that those conditions guaranteed. You call our regional network terrorism. I call it the only deterrent the region has against a nuclear-armed Israel that has bombed 7 Arab countries in the last decade. Hezbollah was born in 1982 because Israel invaded Lebanon and killed 17,000 civilians. The Houthis fired at Israel because Israel was killing Palestinian children at a rate of 1 every 15 minutes. These groups are not Iranian inventions. They are Iranian alliances with people already at war with you for their own reasons. And here is the moral question you avoid. You have killed more than 50,000 Palestinians in Gaza, including 17,000 children. You have killed 3,400 Iranians in 2 months. You have killed more than 2,700 in Lebanon. The numbers do not lie. One side is doing most of the dying, and it is not Israel.
October 7th was not a tragedy of geopolitics. It was a slaughter. Hamas terrorists crossed our border at dawn and murdered 1,200 people. Children burned in their bedrooms, families executed at a music festival, women raped beside the bodies of their husbands. They took 250 hostages, including infants, and every one of those killers had been trained, armed, and funded by Iran. The IRGC's Quds force had been preparing them for years. The drones that flew over our communities were Iranian designs. The rockets that fell on our cities were Iranian models. The tunnels under Gaza were dug with Iranian engineering. After October 7th, Iran's other proxies activated within hours. Hezbollah began firing rockets from Lebanon, displacing 80,000 Israelis from their homes for over a year. The Houthis fired ballistic missiles from Yemen at our cities and at international shipping. Iraqi militias struck American bases. This was a coordinated war from a single command center. Tehran, you ask me to defend our moral structure. I will. We did not invade Lebanon to colonize it. We invaded to stop the rocket fire. We did not bomb Gaza for sport. We bombed it to destroy the army that murdered our people. Every life lost is a tragedy, and we mourn the Palestinian children who died. But the moral question is, who started this? And the answer is the regime that built the entire architecture of our deaths and called it resistance.
Let's speak about the dead. As of May 2026, more than 3,400 Iranians have been killed in this war, including hundreds of children. 26 Israelis have been killed by Iranian missile strikes, more than 2,700 in Lebanon. How do you each justify the human cost of your strategy?
Spare me the sermon about your conscience. You speak of warnings and leaflets while a U.S. strike obliterated a girls' elementary school in Minab, the Shajareh Tayyibeh school, killing children at their desks. You speak of careful targeting while bombs fell on the Nilufar Square in Tehran during Ramadan, killing 20 civilians who had just broken their fast with their families. You speak of values while striking 65 schools, 14 medical centers, and 5,535 residential buildings in the first 10 days. The Red Crescent counted them. The IAEA, the United Nations Human Rights Council, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, all condemned what you have done. The UN High Commissioner called it reckless. Even Israeli newspapers reported the strikes were chosen to break civilian morale and trigger regime collapse. That is a strategy of collective punishment, which is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. And let me address your numbers comparison directly, because it is the most dishonest thing you have said. You compare 26 Israeli dead to 3,400 Iranian dead and present this as proof of your morality. The opposite is true. The ratio of 1 to 130 is not a measure of your discipline, it is a measure of your impunity. It is the ratio that tells you which side has F-35s and bunker busters and which side does not. You did not kill fewer because you wanted to, you killed more because you could. The dead are not abstractions. They are the verdict on what your war actually is.
I do not justify it. I mourn it. Every civilian death is a wound on the conscience of a country that values life. But I will tell you what we do that Iran does not. We warn before we strike. We drop leaflets. We make phone calls into Iranian neighborhoods telling people to evacuate. We have aborted operations when we saw children near the target. We have turned back missiles in mid-flight when intelligence revealed civilians had moved into the strike zone. Iran does not do this. Iran fires cluster munitions, banned by 100 nations under the Convention on Cluster Munitions, into our residential neighborhoods. The strike on Beit Shemesh on March 1st killed 9 civilians in a residential building. The strike on Bnei Brak scattered submunitions across a Haredi neighborhood and wounded an 11-year-old girl. The Iranians fired ballistic missiles toward Dimona, a nuclear facility, knowing what radiation release into civilian areas would mean. Numbers without context are propaganda. The 3,400 in Iran include IRGC commanders, missile engineers, regime officials, and yes, civilians who live too close to military targets that the regime placed inside their cities. Iran builds command centers under hospitals. Iran stores missiles inside residential buildings. The civilian shield is the regime's strategy, not ours. And still, I do not say the deaths do not count. They count. They count more than I can express. But the question is who chose this war and who is forced to fight it.
Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz on March 4th. 20% of the world's oil and gas passed through it. Brent crude surged past $120 a barrel. Gulf states cut oil production by 10 million barrels a day. Did either of you weigh what this war would do to the rest of the world?
You list the costs of the war as if they are accidents of geography. They are consequences of choice, your choice. The Strait of Hormuz was open for 40 years while Iran was sanctioned, surrounded, and assassinated by Israeli operations on its soil. We did not close it in peacetime. We closed it because you bombed our soil. You broke the rule that has governed the Persian Gulf since the end of World War II, that you do not strike Iran in its own territory. We responded by enforcing the only leverage geography gave us. And let us be honest about what the closure means. It means the Gulf monarchies that hosted your bombers, that allowed American jets to refuel on their tarmacs, now face the consequences of choosing your side. It means a global economy that profited from cheap Iranian oil, while supporting our destruction now feels what it costs to participate in our suffocation. You speak of desalination plants and grain ships as if these targets were chosen out of cruelty. They were chosen because they are the infrastructure of the regimes that fund and enable Israeli aggression. This is the principle of deterrence. The same principle Israel uses every day. And here is what you cannot escape. The world is asking what $120 oil costs. It should be asking what Israeli impunity costs. Because the price of pretending Iran has no right to defend itself is being paid right now, in every gas station from Tokyo to Sao Paulo. We did not create that price. We exposed it.
Yes. And the answer is that the world had a choice. For 30 years, the world chose to negotiate with Iran, while Iran built the missile program, the proxy network, and the nuclear infrastructure that has now created this crisis. Every American president since Bush, every European leader, every UN resolution warned that Iran's program would eventually force a confrontation. They knew. They chose to defer it. The deferral is what produced $120 oil, not our strikes. The strait closure was Iran's choice, not ours. We hit nuclear facilities. Iran chose to weaponize global shipping. They mined the strait. They seized cargo vessels. They struck a Qatari LNG facility that supplies 1/5 of the world's natural gas. They attacked desalination plants in Kuwait, knowing 99% of that country's drinking water comes from those plants. This is the regime you defend. A regime willing to starve its neighbors and crash the world economy rather than give up the program that started this war. We did not weigh the cost lightly. Israel will pay the cost too. Our economy is staggering. Our reservists have been called up by the tens of thousands. Our skies have been closed, but the alternative was waiting for the bomb. And once Iran has the bomb, the cost is not $120 oil. The cost is Tel Aviv in radioactive ruins. The cost is the only Jewish state on earth ending in a flash. Compared to that, $120 oil is a number. Tel Aviv is a country.
What is the hardest part of defending the position you defend?
The hardest part is defending a state that has done terrible things to its own people, while it is being bombed by a state that wants to destroy it. I will not pretend the Islamic Republic is innocent. We executed protesters in 2009. We crushed the Green Movement. We killed thousands of our own citizens during the 2022 Mahsa Amini uprising. In January 2026, our security forces massacred more Iranians during peaceful protests. I cannot defend any of that, and I will not try. The contradiction I live with is this: the regime that has hurt my people the most, that has stolen our future and our economy, is also the regime that the United States and Israel are now bombing. And when those bombs fall, they do not fall on the regime. They fall on Tehran's mothers, Tehran's hospitals, Tehran's schools. They fall on a generation of Iranians who did not choose Khamenei, who would have voted against him if voting were real, who hate the IRGC as much as you do. So I find myself defending a country I want to change, against a war I cannot accept. That is the hardest part. The world wants me to choose between the regime and the bombing, as if those were the only options. But I am Iranian first, before the regime, before the revolution, before the slogan. The bombs do not know who is loyal and who is dissident. They only know how to fall. And when they fall on my country, I am not free to be silent because the regime that rules me is corrupt. I am still bound to defend the people.
The children. That is the honest answer. I sit with maps of Tehran neighborhoods and I see schools, apartments, hospitals, and I know that some of those buildings have IRGC officers in them and some do not, and our intelligence is good, but it is not perfect. And every time we strike, there is a name we did not know, a child whose mother sent her to school that morning, a grandfather who was visiting his son. I carry that. We all carry that. The hardest part of being Israeli is that we have been chosen by history to face an enemy that hides behind its own civilians, and we cannot reach the enemy without sometimes reaching the civilians. Our doctrine is to minimize, to warn, to verify, but minimization is not zero, and the moral burden does not go away because the enemy is worse. The second hardest part is the loneliness. Most of the world does not understand that we live every day knowing one mistake ends us. We are the size of New Jersey. We have no strategic depth. A single nuclear missile means there is no second Israel. So when we are accused of overreaction, of disproportionality, I want to ask the world, what would you do if you were 9 million people surrounded by 200 million enemies, and one of those enemies just announced he wanted you dead? What would proportionality even mean? But I cannot ask that question, because the world has already decided we should answer to a standard no other country is asked to meet.
Identify the deepest flaw in your opponent's worldview. Not their policies, their entire moral framework.
The deepest flaw in your worldview is that you have built an entire moral system around the idea that Jewish suffering justifies any action, and you cannot see that the same logic, in the hands of any other people, would horrify you. You say October 7th was the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. It was, but you have killed 8 times more Palestinian children in response than the Israelis Hamas killed that day. You say the Holocaust must never happen again. And I agree, no people should ever face annihilation. But you have used that promise as a license to do the unthinkable to a different people, and to ask the world not to look. You have built a state where 20% of the citizens are Arabs and yet 65 separate laws define their inferiority. You have occupied a territory for 56 years and called it a security measure. You have demolished 50,000 Palestinian homes and called it law. And when anyone, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, your own former generals, points this out, you call them anti-Semites. That is the flaw. Your suffering, which is real, has become a wall against accountability. You have made it impossible to criticize your state without being accused of wanting your destruction, and in that way you have weaponized history itself. You confuse the trauma of being a victim with permission to be a perpetrator, and until you can separate those two things, no peace is possible. Not with Iran, not with Palestine, not with the world.
The deepest flaw is that Iran's worldview cannot survive its own logic. They tell us we are colonizers, but they fund a war from Yemen to Lebanon to remake the entire region in their image. They tell us they are anti-imperial, but they have armed militias in 7 countries and overthrown governments in 3. They tell us we are religious extremists, but their constitution is built on the rule of a Shia cleric whose every word becomes law. They tell us we kill civilians, but they have killed more Muslims than Israel ever has. In Syria, propping up Assad. In Iraq through their militias, in Iran through their crackdowns. And here is the contradiction at the heart of it all. They claim Palestinian liberation as their cause, while every Palestinian regime they fund is a dictatorship that murders its own people. They speak the language of justice, but they have built a state on theocracy, sexual apartheid, and political prisoners. They are not what they claim to be. Their entire moral framework is a mask. Strip it away and what you find is not resistance. It is a Shia imperial project that uses anti-Israel ideology as a recruiting tool and Palestinian suffering as a flag. And the proof is simple. Whenever the Iranian people themselves have been able to choose, in the streets in 2009, 2017, 2022, 25, they chose against the regime. Their own population sees what the regime is. The world has just been slower to see it.
Looking back at your own side's history, when was your nation, your ideology, or your state wrong about something important?
We were wrong in Syria. When the Syrian people rose up against Bashar al-Assad in 2011, we made a choice. We chose the regime over the people. We sent the IRGC, we sent Hezbollah, we sent Iraqi militias. We helped Assad murder his own population. Barrel bombs on bakeries, sieges of starving cities, chemical weapons on children in Ghouta. We told ourselves we were defending the axis of resistance against an American-Israeli plot to dismember Syria. Some of that fear was real. Some of it was paranoia. But the cost was 1 million dead Syrians and a country reduced to rubble. We have to live with that. We were also wrong about our own people, about how much repression they would tolerate before they would no longer recognize us. The Green Movement of 2009, the Mahsa Amini protests of 2022, the 2025 uprisings. Every time, we doubled down on force. Every time, we lost more legitimacy. We told ourselves we were defending the revolution from foreign interference, and we became the foreign interference in our own country. The hardest admission is this. We became, in many ways, the thing we said we opposed. We exported the revolution at gunpoint. We crushed dissent in the name of independence. We stole an election and called it the will of God. I am still defending Iran because Iran is more than the regime. But I will not defend the regime's claim that it has been a clean hand in a dirty world. We have dirtied our own hands many times.
We were wrong about Lebanon. The 1982 invasion. We went in to remove the PLO from southern Lebanon, and we believed we would be welcomed as liberators by the Shia population. We told ourselves a story, that our enemies were also their enemies. We were wrong. The occupation lasted 18 years. It killed thousands of Lebanese civilians, and it created the very organization that has terrorized us for 40 years. Hezbollah was born in the alleys of southern Lebanon as a direct response to our presence there. We made the enemy we feared. We thought military force could remake a country, and instead it radicalized one. We were wrong about settlements too. The men who pushed deep into the West Bank in the 1970s and 80s told us this would bring security, and instead it created a permanent occupation that has eaten the soul of our democracy and made peace harder, not easier. I will not pretend Israel has never been wrong. We have been. We have been wrong when we believed force could substitute for politics. We have been wrong when we believed time was on our side. We have been wrong when we believed that fear of us was the same as security. The lesson of Lebanon is one I think about now. We struck Iran in 2026 with the same confidence we struck Beirut in 1982. I hope we have learned something. I am not certain we have.
Setting ideals and grievances aside, what is your actual practical plan from here? The ceasefire is conditional. The strait is barely open. Khamenei is dead. What now?
Our plan has 4 pillars, and they are not negotiable. First, end the occupation of Iranian airspace and the violation of our sovereignty. The conditional ceasefire must become a full ceasefire with binding international guarantees. The United States and Israel must commit in a UN Security Council resolution never again to strike Iran on its own soil. Second, the rebuilding of Iran. Sanctions must be lifted, frozen assets must be returned. Reconstruction of the 6,668 civilian buildings damaged in the strikes must be funded by those who destroyed them, including the United States. The 376 children who were killed cannot be returned. The damage to their families can at least be acknowledged. Third, a regional non-proliferation framework that applies to everyone. If Israel keeps its nuclear weapons, Iran will retain the right to its civilian program at any enrichment level. If the region demilitarizes, we will demilitarize. We will not accept a system where only one country is permitted to be armed. Fourth, the Palestinian question, which this war has tried to bury, must be central to any settlement. There is no peace in the Middle East, while Gaza is a ruin and the West Bank is occupied. We will not stop supporting Palestinian self-determination because you bombed our country. The bombing did not change the facts. It only proved that the system you built cannot tolerate any voice that challenges it. Our plan is not surrender, it is the terms on which peace becomes possible.
Our plan has 5 parts, and I will be direct about each. First, complete verification that Iran's nuclear program is dismantled, not paused, not monitored. The 60% uranium must leave the country. The advanced centrifuges must be destroyed. The IAEA must have full access to every site, declared and undeclared, with no exceptions. Second, structural disarmament of Iran's regional proxies. Hezbollah's weapons in Lebanon must be surrendered to the Lebanese state. The Houthis must end attacks on shipping. Iraqi militias must be integrated into Iraqi state forces or dissolved. Third, normalization expansion. The Abraham Accords must extend to Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, and beyond. The future of the Middle East is integration with Israel, not war against it. Fourth, a permanent regional security architecture, led by the moderate Sunni states, the Gulf monarchies, Israel, Egypt, Jordan, a coalition strong enough that no single revisionist power can destabilize the region. Fifth, the Palestinian question must be addressed seriously, but not while Hamas exists as an army. Reconstruction of Gaza requires demilitarization first. We are open to negotiations on a Palestinian future, the day Palestinian leadership rejects armed resistance. We will not pretend the Iranian regime cannot rebuild. They will try. But the world has crossed a threshold. The Islamic Republic is not the regional power it was. Our plan is to ensure it never becomes that power again.
Final question. After everything that has been said, what is the one thing the other side understands correctly that your own side has been unwilling to admit?
Israel understands something I have not wanted to admit. They understand that a state surrounded by enemies who deny its right to exist cannot afford the same risks other states can. The Jewish people were nearly extinguished within living memory. 6 million dead is not an abstraction. It is a generation of grandparents who never got to grow old. And when Israelis tell us they cannot accept a regional balance that includes a regime calling for their destruction, They are not being paranoid, they are remembering. We have used the word resistance for 40 years to describe a project that, at its rhetorical extremes, has called for the elimination of a country and the people in it. Most Iranians do not believe that. Most of us want to live in a region where Jews and Muslims share a sea and a sky, but the regime spoke a language of annihilation, and that language was heard, and it became the foundation of the fear that made this war. I cannot ask Israelis to ignore that. I can only ask them to recognize that the fear, once it became policy, produced a war that has killed thousands of Iranians who never threatened anyone. Both nations are now wounded. Both have memory that will outlast the ceasefire. The question is whether we can build something from that mutual wound, or whether we will simply pass it down, generation to generation, until the next war finds us. We did not solve this debate, maybe we cannot. But the moment we stop talking is the moment the missiles speak again, and the missiles have spoken enough.
Iran understands something we have refused to face, that the suffering of Palestinians is real, and that we have allowed it to become a permanent fact of our existence. We tell ourselves the conflict is forced upon us, that there is no partner, that nothing can be done, and in some seasons that has been true. But we have also become comfortable with an arrangement where 2 million Palestinians live under our control without the rights we grant ourselves. That is a moral problem that is ours, regardless of what Iran does. Iran did not invent it, we did, and until we address it, we will keep producing the conditions that produce our enemies. Iran is also right that nuclear hierarchy in the region is a contradiction. We hold weapons we will not declare while demanding others not develop them. The world has tolerated this because of who we are and what was done to us. But the contradiction is real, and one day it must be faced. I will not surrender our security to ideology. But I can admit that not every word from Tehran is propaganda. Some of it is truth, bent, weaponized, distorted, but truth at the core. And the day we can hear that truth without flinching is the day peace becomes possible. We are not there yet, but I am not closing the door.